The top 100 agents are the best of the best, listing and selling more than any other agent in Australia.
Sold. Congratulations, sir. Well bought.
These are the practices, actions and beliefs of the most successful agents in Australian real estate. Raw, honest and completely uncut. Welcome to REB's Secrets of the Top 100 Agents.
Well, good day everyone. It's Garman here, editor of Real Estate Business and Smart Property Investment, back today with a very special crossover episode because I've got a very, very special friend over in Perth. I don't think we've even met in person, but he's my go-to Perth whisperer about all things going on out west. And for those of you who are in the know, and I know everyone who listens to SPI and REB, you got your finger on the pulse, and everyone's got to know that the Perth market is pretty hot at the moment. Ashby and we had a podcast earlier in the year. I think it was late January or early Feb. And Ashby gave some pretty amazing insights into the world of the Perth market. And at that point, listings were down. It was single number of days on market. And I know a lot of people have been watching it because we've seen the Sydney market over the last few weeks and the Melbourne market as well. They've been tracking down just a little bit, few percent down in terms of sale price, but Perth is steaming ahead as always. So I thought it'd be a good time to get our Perth Whisperer back on another joint episode of REB and SPI. I am joined by the one and only Ashby Farrell, Director and Licensee at WHTEARCH. Mate, welcome back to the podcast. How are you going?
Hey, Liam, I am well. Thank you for having me on. Obviously, exciting times here in Perth. It's lots of talk in the real estate market. So, yeah, looking forward to diving in it with you.
And I've got to be honest with you, Ashby, I think you've got some of the coolest branding of any real estate agent. I love the WHTEARCH brand so much. Mate, before we dive in, give us a little bit of background into yourself, into your background and the genesis of WHTEARCH.
Yeah, so myself, I've been in the industry for, 12 or 13 years now. WHTEARCH is about 5 years old. The branding was a shout out to my partner. She owns a branding and marketing agency. So I was pretty lucky. I hit the ground running with some pretty cool branding. And as you can tell, I like a bit of merch. So we like to, make different types of jumpers and tote bags and all sorts and just give them away. It's kind of, we want it to feel kind of luxurious as opposed to just typical, Joe Blow's property company. So, so that's kind of around it. We wanted it to feel a little bit more luxe. And then myself started in elite sport when I was a kid. At some point when things are not maybe going the way you hoped, or maybe you get injury or whatever it is, I was told by the parents, hey, you need to go get a job. So that's how I landed in real estate. Yeah. Apparently I had to pay rent or something. So then that's how I landed in real estate, got my first gig, and then I've been in it ever since, and I love it. So very, very happy with the career trajectory that I've taken so far.
So what markets do you service at the moment in Perth?
Yeah, so our office is located in Mount Lawley, and we service primarily the residential market. We service the suburbs surrounding Mount Lawley, so Mount Lawley, Leederville, Perth 6000, Highgate, Northbridge. They would be North Perth. They would be our top suburbs, but we sell everywhere. So tomorrow I'm going to Caversham, which probably like 20 minutes northeast of here. And then from there, I'll be going all the way down to Fremantle. So that's a pretty big spread. And then the week after that, we're launching one in South Perth. So we will go everywhere, very much client-driven, client-led as opposed to suburb-led. But yeah, I did cut my teeth in that northern city fringe is what I call it.
And Perth is such a cool place. I know I've been a few times, and I always make the pilgrimage down to Fremantle because it is an amazing place to be. And Perth is really cool at the moment. And in terms of property, it is one of those super resilient markets. Now, for those who didn't have the chance to join us earlier in the year when you and I last spoke, you gave some very interesting insights into the split and what's going on in the Perth market. And I remember you very distinctly telling me that it's a very natural growth in the market. And what I mean by natural is it's not necessarily just investor-led. There is liquidity on the ground. There is PPI demand. There is such a shortage. I think when we were last talking, the average number of days on market for most of your properties was like 8 days. So it's kind of up and then it's down. They found a buyer in out because a lot of families there just needed place to live. Ashby, what are you seeing on the ground at the moment? Give us a quick overview of the Perth market and a breakdown of the average buyer. Is it still a PPOR market or is it still an investor market?
I think it's to your first question. I think it's a principal place market. So what we're seeing, well, the good news, if you're a buyer, the good news, stock levels have risen since we last spoke. So when we last spoke, it was just after Christmas. I think we were at 2,100 or something, and we had actually dropped below 2,000 properties for sale. So stock is back up. I think it's 4,200 as of Monday this week, which is good. And the amount of sales has dropped. So we were trending at about 900 to 1,000 sales per week for a really long time, for week on week for 4 years, 5 years. And probably the last 2 months, the last 8 weeks, it's been somewhere between like 600 and 800 on the high end, probably not even 800, like 600 and 750. So that is a good thing for the buyers. Now, I don't want that to freak out sellers or people that own thinking the market's going to crash. The reality of it is 4,400 is still nowhere near where we need to be. So this is just helping us get back to a more equal kind of playing field, and we're still a way off of equal playing field. But what it does mean is that sellers need to think a little harder about where they're positioning their property, how they're marketing it, how they're presenting it, because buyers do have a little bit more choice, which means they have a little bit more time, which means the competition is not quite as great. But if we're comparing this to any market previously, besides the one that was the previous 12 months, people would still think it's bizarre, untenable. So it is still a crazy market. It just feels like it's cooled off because buyers have maybe 2 weeks now to make a decision.
Well, I suppose it's all a relative thing. So the number of listings, I was just taking some notes while you were talking. So the number of listings is up. More people are willing to sell, but the number of actual sales, so the people that are, selling at auction, the number of people that are actually signing on the dotted line, they've actually dropped down a bit. So I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. I'm just going to take a moment here to frame where we're at, right? So we are recording this, hours before the federal budget. So we don't actually know necessarily exactly what's going to happen. Now, we're not going to timestamp this with, what's going on in the news today, because there are so many different theories. I think I've clicked on about 3 or 4 different stories over the last week, and each of them have given a different theory as to what's going to happen with capital gains or negative gearing. So we're just going to assume that something's going to happen. We're going to assume that something's going to happen because everyone in the market assumes something's going to happen. But digging into that, there is, in headlines, there's a little bit of a malaise at the moment. People are saying that, investors aren't jumping in. People are saying that there's a fire sale of houses, investors going to sell. People looking at the economic clouds on the horizon. Interest rates are up. We had the interest rate rise just recently as well. Petrol costs are up. People aren't as economically sound as they were before. There's less money in the back pocket of mortgagees and homeowners. But this is where it gets interesting. So where you say that the number of sales is actually lower, the way that I would interpret that, Ashby, is that this isn't a fire sale that where we're at. This is actually, there are people that are willing to sell if people come to the party with the right price. They're not necessarily compelled, hey, I've lost my job, I just need to get rid of my mortgage and sell. No, they're just a little bit more happy to wait a week, 2 weeks longer to get the right price. There's not that panic sale that a lot of headlines are suggesting. Is that the right ballpark? Is that what you make of it?
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. I think in Perth, certainly people aren't rushing out to sell because of the headlines right now. I will say that I am having a lot more conversations with investors about selling, whether that's now, before the budget's released, or whether that is, in the weeks following. A lot of people, I think, are in a holding pattern, and I think that's the same with the buyers. So I actually think the reason the sales have dropped is probably more the buyer's side. One, affordability. We've had 3 interest rate rises, so it's getting harder and harder to borrow to buy, and our prices have obviously gone up. And 2, with all the news cycle, buyers are in a little bit of a holding pattern. They want to see what's going to happen, I think. Maybe there's a bit of panic. There's probably a bit of panic on both sides, but maybe there's a bit of panic on the buyer's side that if I transact on something right now and the news cycle is that they're going to bring in a tax, and then all those people that are going to get taxed are going to bring their properties to market, and I've just bought at the peak. So I think there's a little bit of, can we wait and see what happens with the budget, and can we wait and see what happens with the market following that budget announcement? So that's why I personally think the transactions are lower in Perth. And, also couple that with affordability as well.
It's very hard. You and I aren't in the business of giving financial advice. We're not legally allowed to give financial advice. This is just opinion, Ashby, but we've been reading these headlines since Feb, probably. I remember when my boss first texted me and he was like, hey, I think, I've heard this rumor. It was just before the news started reporting on it. I heard this rumor from a friend in politics that they're mulling over CGT and negative gearing changes. And that was months ago. And I turned to my wife. I'm like, well, what are we going to do? This is such a big thing. She's like, oh, we'll just hold forever then. Well, okay, that's a solution that a lot of people have fallen on. But it's been about 3-4 months that this has been in the mix. We've been talking about it for quite a while. And I think a lot of those people who would be panic selling as investors probably would have panic sold by now. And what I mean by that is, there was a little bit of ambiguity as to whether, it's going to be grandfathered. If you've already bought, would you have all the capital gains discounts? If you've already bought, would you have the negative gearing discounts, negative gearing, tax concessions, all of that? If you were in such a position that you were compelled to sell, I think you probably would have already done it anyway. I think a lot of people in the market now are more likely to be buy and hold for the long term, because realistically, if the government comes out, again, it's just in a couple of hours' time, if they do come out and say, well, we won't be grandfathering it, well, then if you've already got the stock, if you've already got the property, then you're going to be under those new tax laws anyway. I think that there's also a very big argument as well that, especially in WA, that supply is going to really drop and supply is going to be pretty constrained. We've seen that already with the state government over in WA being really ready to invest in large-scale infrastructure projects off the back of the mining boom. So you've got the resources industry, which is dragging so many good, capable tradies to regional areas to work on the mines. Then you've got the state government with a massive windfall that's building a lot of infrastructure projects, again taking tradies off of tools to build houses. I think you're probably going to be seeing, and of course with interest rate rises as well, the level of debt to actually build, I think that there's going to be a bit of a supply slowdown in Perth. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if this is on the mind of a lot of people buying in Perth at the moment, but the indicators are still there for a pretty resilient Perth market going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we talked about it back in January. Until we can fix our supply issues, we probably can't fix the underlying issue with the Perth market. Part of the reason the established market is going so well, if you're an owner, is the fact that the cost of replacement is frankly absurd.
Yeah. So
some of these houses, people go, oh, well, I have to pay $1 million to live 30 minutes from the city. I agree. 3 years ago, that was absurd if you had to pay that amount of money. But now, what's happened with the construction industry since COVID, right? Can you replace that building and that piece of land for what someone is asking for? And most of the time, the answer is no. So people can't actually even build what they're trying to buy for less, right? So that doesn't help with supply, because where's the motivation for a first home buyer or a second home buyer to go, you know what, I'm going to go build a house. I'm going to have to wait 2 years or 3 years, and it's going to cost me more, right, than this other house that's available right now. Yes, it's going to be new and upgraded and nicer, but you're going to have to wait, and you have to pay the taxes and the holding costs and all of that. So we haven't even got to a point where the building industry makes sense for a lot of people. And the people that needs to make sense to are developers. And the only thing that makes sense for developers to build in Perth right now, in WA, is high-end property. That's all they're building. They can't, if they went and built a building in Mount Lawley and they wanted it to be for entry-level buyers, the one bedrooms would probably start at like $900,000. I don't know about you, but that's not entry level. That's not, I've just graduated university and I've got my first job and I'd like to buy a property type prices. So that's not the developer's fault. That's what they are trying to make a profit, and to make a margin, they have to sell them at $900,000. They will not be able to do it for $600, $550, $500. It's not feasible. So this is the underlying issue here in WA right now, and frankly across the globe.
Oh, and I couldn't agree more. I was doing a podcast with a buyer's agent that's out on SPI, who was doing work with, who was buying units down in Melbourne. And he said the exact same thing, which was in the suburb that he's buying in at the moment, you can buy established units for $550, and the replacement cost for that unit is now up to the mid 900s. So it's exactly what you're saying, that it's like, well, the extra utility that you get buying new just doesn't add up. And you see it right across the country. You highlighted about some of those new house and lands. I've been talking to people, that have been looking at house and land packages in some, frankly, and I'm not going to say the suburbs because it's not necessarily fair, but frankly quite undesirable locations around Brisbane in particular. Locations, not to knock them, but they're asking between $1 to $1.1 million for a house and land package that hasn't actually begun construction yet. So you correctly highlighted, you've got the holding cost of, if you were to buy this place, the holding cost of purchasing it, but also renting in the meantime or paying a mortgage in the meantime. And the economic fundamentals here, where when you're not necessarily buying in an area which is in demand, would people that live in that area have the finances to pay $1 to $1 million if you had to sell it at some point in the future? Well, probably not. To your point, $900,000 is not an entry level price, and there are areas around Australia that would just never demand $900,000, and there are areas around Australia that would just never demand $1.1 million, no matter how good that new build might be. For a multitude of reasons. So I completely agree that the replacement cost factor there is really driving a lot of demand in that established market. You and I were having a few emails back and forth earlier this week about the banning of no grounds terminations in Perth. Mate, what does that mean, and is it going to substantially change the game at all?
Okay, so I want to be clear. It's not in yet. It's proposed, but the proposal was pretty much a, hey, we're going to do this proposal, is my understanding. So they're going to fall in line with the other states. I think we might be the only state that doesn't have no grounds termination. A lot of the articles, news reporting, you've got the big WA to ban no grounds evictions. This is what a lot of people have been saying. I just want to clarify the definition, because evictions, no grounds evictions, always been a thing. You can't just evict someone. There is a difference between a termination and an eviction, and I think that there's a lot of confusion around that. Okay, termination is the end of a lease has met its date, and you can terminate it under the correct notice periods. So if you're on a fixed term lease and it's meant to end on the 30th of June, if you give 30 days notice to say, I no longer wish to lease this property to you, that lease would be terminated on the 30th of June.
You've done your contract.
So
it's run its date.
You've done your contract. Your contract has come to an end. So, so that's a bit of confusion around what's happening, what's changing. What they're essentially saying is on the 30th of June, if you do not have a reason under the new legislation that they'll bring in, they'll put in some reasonings that might be renovating, selling the property, some major renovations, selling the property. They said breach notices, but there's no clarity around what type of breaches, how many, things like that. So that would mean that you will have to release the property to that tenant. So what does it mean for the marketplace? I think from a landlord's perspective, there is a lot of anger towards it, maybe misplaced anger. I think if you're a landlord, besides the clerical side of things, the actual extra workload that you'll probably have to protect yourself, you potentially will be in a better investment. And the reason being is you're going to have better tenants because you're going to be forced to do better checks and balances. You're going to be forced to stay on top of breaches more regularly. But then also, if there is a little bit of a panic from other landlords, they'll probably leave the market and you'll probably end up with more rent. Not saying that any of this is a good thing, but that's just kind of what I see, where I see it going, because I think bringing in no grounds terminations will potentially make tenants' lives more difficult. So the reality is no one has ever removed a tenant that pays their rent on time, keeps the property clean, and asks for a reasonable level of maintenance, right? Obviously, it is the owner's responsibility to maintain a property. Some maintenance, absolutely, we say to our owners, you need to do this maintenance. Like, this is something that would be expected. If you lived in the property, you would want that to be done. Sometimes maintenance is not reasonable. And there is a balance there from both sides. So I think no one's ever removed someone under those conditions, right? Just because. So bringing this in will mean that the tenants that are maybe, good tenants but not great tenants, they're going to get kind of hit the hardest because they're going to start getting breach notices that they wouldn't have otherwise got. We have plenty of tenants pay their rent a day or too late, and there's many reasons why they would pay their rent a day or too late. If it becomes a recurrence, then obviously we'll start to breach earlier. But if it's once in a while, we're not going to send them a breach notice. It's unnecessary, right? We're going to give them a call and say, hey, just letting you know, not sure if you saw, your rent is 1 day late. Would you mind please processing it? And most of the time they go, oh, sorry, I forgot, or my bank has changed, or whatever the reason might be. Now, because this legislation would come in, we're probably going to be forced to send a breach notice. Not for the fact that at the end we're going to want to remove them, but for the fact that if anything ever does go wrong with that tenant, property managers, landlords are going to they're going to need some sort of paper trail, because it's going to be harder to remove tenants that aren't, the right tenant for the property. And just my personal opinion on that type of thing is, I don't know of another contract that, you would put in that had an end date, and then at the end of that date, you just have to give them another contract. Like, that's the whole purpose of the end date. So we're kind of killing fixed term leases as well at the same time. What would be the point of a fixed term lease if you have to continue to renew them, unless you're going to sell the property or renovate it?
So it is still speculative at the moment. It hasn't been.
It is all speculative, and that hasn't been brought in, and they haven't put in what they're going to consider reasonable grounds. This is the thing. What is considered reasonable grounds? That's going to be the key. Depending on how long that list is, how in depth that list is there going to be grey areas? There's always grey areas in these things. So what are the grey areas going to be? One that came straight to my mind is, let's say you offer a tenant a renewal of the lease, and let's say it's market rent's $25 a week more. Let's say the tenant says, no, I don't want to agree to that. Is it going to be in the legislation that's reasonable grounds that you can say, well, I don't want to renew your lease then? Or do you have to renew them because they've declined, because it's no grounds terminations have been banned? So there's a lot of questions to be answered. Yeah.
No, that's very reasonable. So in terms of kind of actionable points for anyone that owns an investment property over in Perth, and I know you guys run a pretty big property management arm, don't you, as well?
Yeah, we have a full property management division, service from start to finish. So we're well versed in tackling these issues, and obviously when they bring in the legislation, we'll have to train up and learn how to deal with the new legislation.
Well, you've jumped on it so quick, it's not even passed yet. So, I mean, the fact that you've kind of already got your, in the event that it passes and in the event that there are these unforeseen circumstances, the fact that you're kind of already on the ball is, I think, yeah. I
think it's pretty well documented. I mean, they made an announcement earlier this week. I think most of the industry believes that this is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Mm.
I think they're already speaking with the industry body to come up with a legislation that would work. So it's not going to be an if. It will happen, and it will happen in the shorter term, not the longer term.
So going to the market more broadly, what are our number of days on market at the moment? Sorry. So last time you and I spoke, it was 8 days. Now it's about 2 weeks.
8 or 9 before. Yeah, maybe not 2. It's up a bit. It's 12 or 13 days, yeah.
So still quite low historically, right? At the end of the day, a listing goes up 2 weeks, it's down.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just the buyers taking a bit more time to make a decision because there's a little bit more stock. And obviously it's suburb to suburb. Some suburbs you go, there's nothing. Other suburbs you go, there's 4 properties. 4 properties still not a lot for a whole suburb.
No, of course. So what you're seeing at the moment, you'd be speaking to, especially through the property management arm as well, you'd be speaking to a lot of investors that have skin in the game in the Perth market. What's the feel? What's the feedback from the coalface in terms of what the budget, CGT, negative gearing, we won't theorise what it's going to be, but what it's going to mean for the Perth property market?
I think there's definitely a lot of frustration from the investors side of things. So the calls I'm having, and I'm having a lot more calls, to investors, or they're calling me. There's a bit of frustration about a lot of the policy, but the underlying kind of the end of those conversations, we kind of always fall on, well, we'll see what happens, and essentially, no one's in a rush to move their properties just because of these changes. I think that we've had such good growth in Perth that if you're invested in property, unless you know where to move your funds outside of property, they kind of go, let's just see where things go. And then the other side of it is that because the news cycle's only just moved away from the construction costs because of the announcements about CGT. But 4 weeks ago or 2 months ago, the news cycle was the cost to build stuff, build homes. And I think most people in Perth understand that the supply issue is not going to go away overnight, no matter the policy changes. And so I think most investors are willing to hold, just knowing that, okay, maybe there's going to be a bit of a quiet period during this budget announcement. Maybe the next 2, 3, 4 months, everything kind of settles. But in the long term, I think most people understand we're not going to be able to build enough. So why would the property market in Perth change?
And I think it's very reasonable to say that if there was an investor-led surge out in Perth, I think the data is pretty clear. It is primarily led by a very strong PPOR market that is driving demand. If it was an investor-led surge, Perth's property prices have really grown over the last 36 months. There would be a lot of people out there that would say, I actually haven't had that much growth. Perth's growing a lot, right? But once you start factoring in things like any buyer's agent costs that you've had throughout the time, stamp duty on the way in, a 2.5% selling cost on the way out, property management fees while holding it, 3 interest rate rises while holding it. While you might see on paper that you've made this really gargantuan return, once you start factoring in the costs along the way, it does eat that margin quite a bit. So there'd be a lot of new investors out there that would say, like, on paper, I've made a lot of money, but I actually do have to hold on to it for a fair bit longer to actually realize any kind of gain.
And rents are strong, so they're holding with the rents are strong. That a lot of them, it's not costing them a lot of money. So the rents are strong, paying for their properties. So for them, it's a whole game. But there are investors getting out. Those investors are generally the older ones. So I have been moving a few investment properties in the last few months. And it's just investors that go, look, there's a lot of change happening in the world right now. I'm a year away from retirement, or I just retired. I'm just going to sell my investment property and I'm going to put the money into my super or into a different investment. Just because that's where they're getting to their stage of life. They made a lot of money in the last 5 years on their property that maybe they've owned for 15 years. And so they're cashing out. But you're exactly right. The younger ones are going, okay, well, there's probably a fair bit more growth in the Perth market. I'll just hold it, Yeah.
Are there any other government regulations on the horizon in Perth that people are tracking?
Any other government, not the major ones that are crossing everyone's mind are the ones that we've already discussed. The no grounds has been, I probably had 4 calls on Monday about that. um, panicky owners going, do I need to sell my property because it's going to become a nightmare to rent it? And CGT, that's the calls we're getting. Negative gearing hasn't been talked about a lot. I don't think it's,
but I suppose that's a function of the higher rents, right? That maybe it's a market where people. It's not like if you're buying in Melbourne. A lot of these people that are buying in Melbourne at the moment have like 3.5% yields. Like it actually really impacts them. So probably with that strong population demand as well, I've heard that there's quite a big the population influx from other states in Australia as well that are looking to go to Perth because relative to Brisbane, it is a more affordable market. So you've got that interstate migration as well. So you would have, by nature, a more resilient rental market as well.
Yeah, I think there's plenty of people moving to Perth. I think Perth is no longer a sleepy little town. I think we've got things to offer now. Perth has grown significantly over the last decade, and we are seeing a lot more people from over east move over here for the lifestyle, for the cost of living is, although the cost of living is up everywhere, I think most people would agree that the cost of living in Perth is still significantly cheaper than Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne. And so this is other reasons why people are very boisterous on the Perth marketplace and Perth in general as a place to live. We've got a strong jobs market. I think we just had another budget surplus, like $3.5 billion or something, and we've got relative to the rest of the country, affordable housing.
Absolutely. So, now, Ashby, in the interest of time, what's next on your horizon? What's the next 12 months got in store for WHTEARCH?
12 months for WHTEARCH. So we're obviously mentioned we're big on property management. So I would love to grow that portion of the business. If I could double it in 12 months would be amazing. And in terms of sales, I would just like to keep my steady flow of sales, 25 to 30 properties a year. But yeah, doubling the size of the business, bringing in some more staff would be great. If there's any agents listening, I'm hiring. So any experienced Perth agents, I would love to have someone come and work beside me in the office, beautiful office. So yeah, that's what we've got planned.
Well, mate, you got the branding right behind you so they can see that. Mate, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Liam. It's been a blast.
That was Ashby Farrell. If you're an agent, he's on the shadow. If you're an agent in Perth and you want to join an agency that wants to double their PUM in the next 12 months and really nail into that boutique sales market, make sure you reach out to Ashby Farrell from WHTEARCH, and I'm sure he would love to have a chat. But also, if you're looking to buy in Perth, if you're looking to jump on the train and get some investments over there, I'm sure he'll be happy to have a chat with you as well and talk through everything that's going on in the Perth property market. But that is all we have time for today on this special crossover REB and SPI podcast. But until next time, bye-bye.